The sound of the mop bucket tipping over echoed sharply across the marble floor. Soapy water spread like a silver mirror beneath the grand chandelier, and for a moment, it reflected the trembling face of the man who had dropped it. His name was Caleb Ward, a janitor in his early 30s, dressed in a light blue uniform that smelled faintly of detergent and rain. His rough hands, calloused from years of scrubbing, were shaking uncontrollably, but not from fatigue. His eyes were locked on a portrait hanging on the cream-colored wall ahead of him, a large, golden-framed painting of a little girl with soft curls, bright blue eyes, and a gaze so hauntingly familiar that the air seemed to vanish from the room. Caleb stumbled back, gripping his chest as though something inside him had been ripped open. That face, those eyes, he had seen them before, every night in the echo of a lullaby sung inside a damp orphanage corridor years ago. His lips trembled as he whispered under his breath, "It can't be her." If you're watching this on Kindness Corner, take a moment right now, like, comment, share, and subscribe, if you believe that hope, compassion, and second chances can still exist in this world. Sunlight streamed through tall French windows, illuminating the expensive cream walls and antique furniture of the Briarwood mansion. The woman standing across from him, Margaret Vale, was the mansion's owner, a poised art curator in her mid-30s, known for her calm grace and meticulous taste. She stood near a carved table, a porcelain teacup untouched beside her. Her soft blonde hair glowed faintly in the daylight as she looked from the startled janitor to the portrait. The silence between them was heavy, as if time itself had stopped to listen. Caleb couldn't tear his eyes away from the painting. The girl in it looked about 5, maybe 6 years old, the same age as Anna, the orphan who had clung to him years ago when the world forgot about both of them. He remembered her tiny hands gripping his shirt when thunder scared her, the way she smiled even when there wasn't enough food, and how she used to whisper, "You're my only family, Mr. Caleb." He had promised her that he would never leave. But life wasn't kind to men like him. He had gone out one morning, just one, to find work at a nearby repair shop after the orphanage's heating broke down. When he returned, the gates were locked, and the building stood eerily quiet. The city had shut it down overnight, scattering the children to better facilities. No one told him where they went. He searched for Anna for years, through shelters and city offices, carrying her old ribbon in his pocket. And now, that same little face stared back at him from a golden frame in a mansion that reeked of wealth and loss. Margaret noticed his trembling hand pointing toward the portrait. She frowned slightly, confusion flickering in her pale blue eyes. To her, this was just a painting, a commissioned piece her late sister had left behind. But to Caleb, it was a heartbeat resurrected. His lips parted again, his voice cracked with disbelief and grief as he whispered, "Ma'am, the girl lived with me in the orphanage." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Outside, the garden shimmered in midday light. Birds sang lazily, and a gardener's rake scraped faintly in the distance. But inside, the silence was unbearable. Caleb's throat tightened, his breath shallow. He stared at the portrait as though the child might blink and speak. His mind was drowning in memories, of cold winters when the heater failed, of spooning watery soup for hungry mouths, of reading fairy tales from torn books under flickering bulbs. He could still see Anna sitting on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, asking if her real parents would ever find her. Margaret slowly walked closer to the portrait, her gaze softening as she studied the girl's features. "That's my niece," she said after a long pause, her voice low and careful. Her name was Clara. She passed away 7 years ago. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Caleb's feet. Passed away. The word stabbed through him. He stepped back, shaking his head, unable to breathe. The sunlight felt harsh now, like judgment. His hands gripped the edge of his mop, but it wasn't enough to steady him. A hollow ache flooded through his chest, not just grief, but guilt. He had failed her once, and the world had taken her before he could even make it right. Margaret turned toward him fully then, watching the tears form in his eyes. She had seen many men crumble before art, but this was different. There was something pure, raw, and painfully human about the way he looked at that portrait. She asked him quietly what he meant. And as he spoke, his story unfolded like a confession written in heartbreak. Caleb told her everything about the orphanage, the children, the closures, and the night he realized he was too poor to matter. He spoke of Anna, the girl who believed in him when he had nothing left to believe in himself. His voice shook, his eyes red, yet his words carried the sincerity of someone who had never learned how to lie. By the time he finished, Margaret's hands were trembling too. The next day, Margaret found herself drawn to the mansion's library, where she kept her sister's old records and adoption papers. The afternoon light fell softly across the shelves, turning the dust into a shimmer of gold. As she opened the folder labeled Clara Vale, she noticed something strange, a discrepancy in the dates. The adoption record showed Clara arriving from a local orphanage that had been shut down under poor conditions the same year Caleb mentioned. She turned another page, her heart tightening as she read the name of the staff member who signed the transfer approval, Caleb Ward. Her breath caught. She rushed to find him, and when she did, he was quietly cleaning the same marble floor where he'd stood frozen the day before. He looked up at her, eyes weary, ready to be dismissed, ready, as always, for disappointment. But she didn't speak at first. Instead, she handed him the old folder, her fingers shaking slightly. He opened it hesitantly, and when he saw his own signature, his knees almost gave out. He pressed a trembling hand against his forehead and exhaled a broken laugh that was half sob, half relief. Margaret realized then that this wasn't a coincidence. The little girl in the painting, her niece Clara, had once been Anna, the orphan who clung to the janitor who had loved her like a father. Her sister had adopted her quietly, changed her name, and taken her far away after moving abroad for treatment. No one had told Caleb. The truth was tragic, but it carried within it a quiet grace. The child he had once lost had not died unloved. She had been cherished, educated, and painted beautifully before her illness took her away. Margaret saw the tears streaming down Caleb's face as he touched the edge of the portrait's frame. She whispered softly that maybe, just maybe, the little girl had never forgotten him. Maybe that's why she had drawn a man in a blue uniform in her last sketchbook, one Margaret had never understood until now. The janitor smiled faintly through his tears, whispering to himself, "She remembered me." He didn't ask for money or sympathy. He just stood there quietly, like a man who'd finally found closure in a world that had stolen too much from him. The mansion, once a monument of silence and grief, suddenly felt alive again, as if the girl's spirit was smiling from the portrait, grateful that her two worlds had finally met. If this story touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support helps stories like this one reach others who believe in love that never fades. Weeks later, Margaret offered Caleb a full-time position at the estate, not out of pity, but because she said the house needed someone who understood what it meant to care. Together, they restored the mansion's gallery, opening a small wing in memory of Clara, filled with paintings of children from orphanages across the city. Caleb's quiet hands cleaned every frame with care, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Sometimes, when he passed by Clara's portrait, he would pause, whisper goodnight, and smile, not in sorrow, but in peace. Before we end, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Caleb's place? And as the camera fades out on the golden light pouring through the mansion's tall windows, we see Caleb standing beneath the portrait, his hand resting over his heart, whispering a prayer of gratitude. For the first time in years, he no longer felt like the man who had lost everything. He felt like a father who had finally been found.